Hey everyone, like we got like a minute, but I guess we'll go ahead and get started. If people are continue to trickle in, they won't miss too much. So today we're not gonna go over like the full installation of Empire and like nuts and bolts of using it. We're really focusing on showing off a bunch of the new capabilities we've put in with the CLI and rebasing the code that we've been working on for the past few months. This will include the new CLI that we're going to be moving towards while moving away from the old CLI that moves us towards the client server architecture that really is going to convert Empire to more of like a team server type of implementation with clients that you'll use, as well as some just kind of cool functionality that's been embedded into Empire as a whole now. And with that, I will pass it off to Coin to start talking about it more.
All right, guys. Looks like a few people are still dropping in, so they can get caught up. This is also going to be recorded, so we'll publish this on YouTube on Monday. So hopefully then if you missed anything, you can easily get caught back up. But what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of go over some of the stuff for just on the Empire side of things real quick on how to start up that team server. I already have my team server running, so let me just turn that off real quick. If you're not familiar with all the different ways to install Empire, you have the traditional way where it's like installed into CLI already. You also have the option to install it as either Poetry or as a Docker. I typically use Poetry. It's one of the easier ways for me to do it. So once I do the full Poetry install, I want to start the Empire server using the RESTful API and the socket IO. The RESTful API, Vince might be able to chime in a little bit to kind of clarify the difference between those two. But the RESTful API allows a traditional API endpoint allowing you to communicate. That's how we've traditionally communicated for Empire and like Starkiller, for example. But the socket IO allows kind of live notifications. So now you have a socket IO port that's set up where it can do live updates back and forth. So if I run a command, I can get immediate feedback without having to pull the API continuously to try to get those responses. So let me get that started.
I think you summed it up. I don't have anything to add to that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, except that it's also used for the new chat server that we're going to show off.
Oh yes, the chat server. So that's starting up. That's going to start up our API and or socket IO. The API is going to run on 1337, and then the socket IO is going to be on port 5000. And you can modify those and change those however you want. And now we're going to come over to the Empire CLI. If you're not already in the Discord channel, I put a link in the chat for the Discord channel. We have a webinar channel inside of there that we're going to be dropping links into, and then have people talk there. It just makes it a little bit easier in case you want to go back and review things. It just kind of makes it hard with the GoToWebinar interface to go back and read messages. So just want to make that as easy as possible for you guys. Vince, can you also drop in? Oh, you already dropped in the Empire CLI yet in the webinar channel? Thanks.
And I'll drop it into the Discord channel.
Perfect.
Beat me to it.
That way you guys can go in and install that and check things out while we're talking as well. But once you download that and install it, you can run that as well. There should be an install script already in there, or at least install commands. And we're going to run it through Poetry. So I'm going to do Poetry run Python 3 main.py. And that's going to drop us into this new Empire CLI. Right now it's its own repo. We do plan on moving this into the regular repo for our overall project soon. But we wanted to have it kind of be separate while we're still doing development. That way they're still independent projects. We can keep making changes without having to affect the functionality of the current Empire server. When you're in here, this gives you the option now to log into different servers using this YAML file. And I'm going to kick it over to Vince because he's kind of going to talk about what this YAML file does and kind of what it brings to the table.
Just taking over control real quick. Yeah, so what we've added into the new CLI is we've brought in some different configuration options into a YAML file. And one of those configuration options is the servers block. And what this allows you to do is configure as many servers as you want in the configuration, so that when you go to connect to a server through the CLI, you can kind of have a shorthand way to do it. And also you get tab complete. So for example, we have a local host block here that defines the host and the port and your username and your password. Someone's saying they don't have audio.
Yeah. Is anyone else having issues with audio?
Okay, looks like it's that person specifically. So we have a local host block here, and you fill in all of the information for that server. And when I pass it back to Coin, you'll see how that works. But when you connect, you can just tab through all of your server configurations in order to log in.
Yeah, and we built this because it's really helpful for supporting segmented architecture when doing an assessment. So you could set it up so that like the first server would be your staging server for setting up like your phishing emails and all your payloads that would pull down. Then you'd have like another server for your persistent server that would only be talked to occasionally, like, you know, as long as 6 hours or 12 hours or even once a day, depending on the length of your operation. And then you'd have like an interactive server. That's kind of like why we defaulted it to 3. You know, this does 2 things. One, it prevents all of your, or 3 things really. It prevents all of your traffic from going to the same place, even if you're not using a redirector, which we recommend that you use a redirector. But even if you're not using a redirector, it segments out where your traffic's going. It also makes it so that if your server does get burned, not everything gets taken down at once. And then it also prevents people from, makes it more difficult for people to accidentally like run an interactive command on your persistence beacon or that kind of stuff, or agent. So it's just segmented architecture is like a really powerful way to run your ops and run it as like how we see like some of the higher end red teams running their architecture nowadays.
Thanks. Looks like some people, or at least looks like Shamrock's still having some issues with this stuff. Maybe Vince, you can help him out real quick. Can you guys see my screen, Vince? Can you see it? Make sure.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So just like they talked about for that YAML file, you can configure all that segmented architecture in there. You can go in, you can type in connect the server you want. -C will give you all your options in here. And then you'll see in that drop-down menu all your different options for your architecture. In this case, just for our demo, we're usually using TryHackMe for this. We're running in their web browser. They have a CLI option in there that you can spin up. So we spun up a server, an Empire server in TryHackMe, and we're just going to leverage that. I'm going to type that in, and that's going to help me connect into that server. And then once it drops in, I should be able to get my CLI. And there it goes. So now I'm inside of the CLI interacting with that team server. That should really give a very similar look and feel of how Empire looks currently. That was really the goal, is we just wanted to transfer over current functionality without missing anything at the moment. And after all that functionality gets moved over, then we'll start building in some more advanced things as well. So now that we dropped in here, we're going to start with some listeners. So if I go into listeners or any other option, for example, I'm going to get a drop-down menu that shows me all my available commands inside of this menu. And you can tell there's a whole bunch of them. And then autocomplete also works with that. So if I go in and type listeners, it's going to give me those options that actually autocomplete these things. So I'm going to drop into listeners here, and I can go in and then view what sort of listeners I have running already. I already have one pulled up. In this menu, I can type in help, which is going to give me all my available commands. Vince went in and had it actually auto-generate all your help commands. So it's going to give you your name of your command, the description of the command, and then how do I use that command, like a usage description as well. Let's go into use listener. When I type in use listener, it's going to give me all my available options for those listeners. And what this does now, which is a little different from how we currently have it, we do some string parsing. So it's going to autofill and search for anything that contains like HTTP, for example. So if I type in HTTP, it's going to give me all those different options. I'm just going to use the standard HTTP listener. And then it's going to pull up all the different info that's in this table here for that listener. So for example, I already have the host already pre-configured, my port, my name, everything that you would use normally is going to be in here. So say I wanted to go in and set just my port, I can do set. It's going to give me this drop-down menu that has all my different options that are already in here. I can select port, for example, if I want to, or if I'm just going to type port, it'll also do that way too. And then say I'm going to set my port to just all 8s. And whenever I'm done, I can type in execute or generate their alias commands. And then once those things are executed, it's going to start it up on the server, and then I'm going to get a notification back that that server was properly configured and then started. One of the nice things, though, using that socket IO is those notifications went out to everybody. So Vince and Hubble both got notifications that this listener started up successfully, and then that way they can leverage it for their infrastructure.
Yeah, and part of this new server client architecture that Empire is moving towards allows us to have the CLI and Starkiller use the same API interface to interact with the server, and allows us to standardize the features across them as well. So, for example, that listener that was just created, anybody that's using the CLI got that notification, but also in Starkiller, you get the same notification that a listener was started by another user.
Yeah, and that's really the powerful thing about that socket IO. So now that we have a working listener, we're going to go in and generate a stager. So we're going to use the use stager option here. And then it's going to bring that drop-down menu that we talked about earlier, where I can scroll through and pick out which one I want. But in this case, we're just going to use the multi-launcher. That's kind of just our go-to one-liner for PowerShell and Python. It's just the easiest one for us to generate at the moment. And you can see you have all your different options available for that stager. I want to go in and say I'm trying to actually run on kind of a more up-to-date system. I'm going to turn off our regular AMZ bypass. I'm sure Hubble will go in and talk about why AMZ bypass 1 isn't a great one anymore.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so AMZ bypass, the default one, only disables AMZ within the PowerShell runtime, whereas AMZ bypass 2 is an actual PowerShell runtime as well as CLR runtime. So when you go to run your C# payloads, if you're using C# assemblies in conjunction with Empire, you're also the AMZ bypass 2 will also bypass AMZ for your C# assemblies, whereas the bypass 1 will not do that.
Yep, thanks. So I went through while he was explaining that, and I changed my settings around a little bit on here. So everything's configured. The last thing I just need to do is go in and configure my listener. When I type set listener, it's going to then look at all my active listeners and give me all the options that are available. So I can go in and I can tab through these, which one I want to use. I'm just going to use the regular test one that we set up. And then as before, I can use execute or generate depending on which command I want to use. They do exactly the same thing in the CLI. So I'm going to generate. That's going to kick it back to the server. It's going to set our AMZ bypass. It's going to turn on obfuscation and then any other settings that we did, and then generate our payload for us right here. So I can go in, I can copy this, I can drop it onto my Windows machine that I'm using. I'm just using a WinDevs machine. If you're not familiar with how Windows does some of their stuff, they put out a development VM that you can download from their website that gives you, I think it's 60 days of access to like a fully up-to-date like Windows 10 box, so you can do development. They're actually really great for testing because you get a fully patched box and you don't have to run it on your bare metal. So go ahead and check those out. If you just type in WinDev on like Google, you can find that. Now, if you wanted to see the notifications, I will drop over there just so you show you the notifications real quick. So I'm just running it here just as a PowerShell ISE. But once I go in and run that, it's going to trigger that new agent, and then the agent's going to come in. If you see on the left-hand side in the TryHackMe server, it did its full staging, and then those notifications came back to the Empire CLI, and that's going to populate pretty much from anywhere you're at. And I'm sure Vincent Hubble saw those exact same things because every user is going to see anytime an agent comes up and is available.
Yeah, and just to reiterate on that again, like that feature is also built into the Starkiller UI. So that message was sent out to anybody using the new CLI, and then also in Starkiller, you would get a notification in the top corner letting you know that there's a new agent connected.
Yep. Dropping into the agents menu now. Agents menu should look really familiar. It's going to tell you all your agents that are currently active and then the ones that are inactive or might have died. So I type in agents, it pops it up. You'll see that some names have, actually all the names in this case, have a star next to them. The star means you're running in an elevated context. So at the moment, all of these agents were elevated. That's because I'm running it from an admin user. From here, I can go in, I can make changes to these. So if I type help, once again, it gives me all my options that are available. I can remove an agent, I can kill it, I can rename it. Gives me all these different options that I would normally have inside of the Empire, the regular Empire CLI. If I want to interact with an agent, for example, I type interact, and then what's going to do, it's going to populate only the ones that are active. So we filtered out those inactive agents because you want to be able to do anything anyway. Once they become active again and those beacons start coming in, they'll turn green and then they'll go into this option here and be pre-populated. So we're going to use this XA one. That's going to drop us into that agent. If I go in now and I type help, just like we talked about before, those pre-populated menus, this is really nice because it's going to show you all the things that you have available. And these are actually leveraging one of the new features that we built in called shortcuts. Vince is going to go in a little bit more detail with how shortcuts work, but just a quick highlight of what they do. Shortcuts allow you to configure your instance, so that way you can have pretty much any module you want pre-populated in your menu, so that way you can go in and use them with pre-configured settings. Vince, I'm going to kick it back over to you now because you're probably going to go a little bit more in detail on how they work.
I took presenter. Okay, so we wanted, when building this new CLI, we knew that there was a lot of options in the interact menu in the old CLI, but they were all written into the code, and it wasn't very easy to go and add new modules there, new shortcuts. So what we wanted to do was provide the flexibility for anybody that's using Empire to add their own shortcuts that is tailored towards their use cases, because depending on the engagement that you're doing, you might have a need for different modules for shortcuts. So what we've done is, in the same config.yaml that server block is in, we now have the shortcuts block. And in the shortcuts block, you can define PowerShell or Python shortcuts. And depending on what type of agent you're interacting with, you're going to get, if you're in a PowerShell agent, you're going to get PowerShell shortcuts. If you're in a Python agent, you're going to get Python shortcuts. And the way that you configure them is in this block here. You have, let's look at a simple one first. So we've defined a shortcut called Sherlock, and then we've said that when someone types the word Sherlock, this is the module that we want to run. Same with Mimicat. So from the interact menu, and when I toss it back to Coin, he's going to show how this works, but you can just type the word Mimicat and it's going to run this module. And anybody can come in and edit their config and add the shortcuts that they want. And then they get a little bit more customizable here with parameters. So you can define parameters for the shortcuts. And if you say that it's a dynamic parameter like we did here, then you pass it, you would say PS inject space listener name space process ID. And we've added in some autocomplete. If the parameter is named listener, you're going to get autocomplete for listeners. If the parameter is agent, you're going to get autocomplete for agent. And what else here? Yeah, and then when I toss it back to Coin, I'll have him show the help menu again. The help menu is auto-populated based off of this configuration, or auto-generated based off this configuration, showing you how to use those shortcuts.
Let me pass it back to me real quick. Let's see. All right, I should be able to see my screen now. So yeah, thanks Vin for going over those shortcut stuff. So like he said, all these are pre-configured or auto-generated, I should say, once you pre-configure your shortcuts. For example, like if I go in and type in Mimikatz, it's going to auto-populate Mimikatz. It's going to set all those configuration things that we predefined, and then when I run it, it's going to queue it up to the server, and then it's going to kick it back. Now I chose Mimikatz. It usually takes a little bit for it to come back, but we can keep operating in this CLI while things are running, and it shouldn't step on our bar at the bottom, which is something that the old CLI really had a problem with. If you did multiple things, usually your text block at the very bottom would get interrupted when new things came back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to queue up shell PS, for example. What shell PS is going to do, it's going to run in the background. It's going to pull up all the processes. So that way I can pull out a process ID and we can run PS inject and kind of show off some of the functionality with PS inject. So now both of those should be queued up and we'll come back at some point. Make sure my agent is still up. Looks like my agent might have died. And this is why we don't do live demos. Let's try that again. We'll try Mimikatz one more time. With my luck, the Windows Defender might have popped back up. So if you haven't noticed, we're actually running Empire without Windows Defender turned on right now and with AMZ disabled. We did that just because this is really about some of the new features in Empire, not really about avoiding Defender. One of the new things they pushed out of Windows actually is this real-time protection turns back on occasionally, which makes things really fun and interesting. I'm sure Hubble can talk about all the fun ways you can avoid things.
Yeah, so your agent probably died, by the way, if it was on when you ran Mimikatz.
Yep, I'm gonna restart that.
So yeah, they've been like really stepping up the capabilities of Defender. They've gotten much more surgical about the signatures they're building. And so it has gotten more difficult. It is still possible to use invoke obfuscation and things like that that are built into Empire and the obfuscation options to bypass Defender. They are patching signatures much faster, and it's a little more involved than it used to be. And just, while we provide the obfuscation options, because they changed the signatures so quickly, it's not feasible for us to maintain Empire being capable of bypassing Defender by every time, like just by turning it on and running it. So that is not something we are actively maintaining.
Yeah.
If there are obfuscation options, like some type of script or tool that you'd like to see integrated with Empire, that is something we would take suggestions for, but we're not going to update like the payloads and stuff to maintain a signature that will get past Defender.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. We're running just the base payload right now. I think, well, besides switching over the AMZ bypass, everything else is pretty much the standard payload. So we're not really using any obfuscation. Token all one is the only obfuscation I turned on, and that's something that really doesn't do anything at this point. It's kind of a deprecated obfuscation at this point. So Mimikatz did come back now, so you can see the results for Mimikatz here. So when Mimikatz comes back, it's going to grab passwords and hashes. And what we can do actually after that comes back is I can drop in a credentials, for example, and I can see that, hey, look, a hash for that user came back and gets auto-populated into our credentials menu. And I can drop back into where I was. So now I'm back into my agent. I can queue up shell PS to get that list of processes again, now that I actually have an agent that's working. And once I get those list of processes back, what we're going to do is we're going to run PS inject, and we're going to inject into a process and get another agent to pop up. Whenever it does populate.
If your agent doesn't get killed.
If my agent doesn't get killed.
It shouldn't. I think you still have your jitter on. You didn't set it to sleep 0. So.
Oh, yes. There we go.
Yeah.
So now my list of all my processes here. So we can go through and select which one we want. I'm just going to pick Explorer once I find it. 3892. So I type in PS inject. It's going to auto-populate my listeners that I have available. So I'm going to use test 1, and I'm going to do 3892. And that's going to spawn a new agent on that box. And once that agent comes back, I'm going to get a notification here that a new agent checked back in. And then I can connect to that one if I wanted to. So that's going to be running in the background. Oh, there it goes already. New agent checked in. And then if I go to my agents menu, I can see all my agents that are there now, which would include the new one as well. So back into here.
And then just to highlight when he typed in PS inject, that is a shortcut that's defined in the YAML, and it offered tab complete options for the listener because the parameter was defined as listener.
Yeah.
So that'll work for any custom shortcuts that you write.
So talking about how some of those things work, we also have use module. Use module, exactly the way it works in the regular CLI is you type use module and then whatever module you want to use. a small change. If you remember how Empire used to work, you used to have to select each menu they want to go through. We've kind of eliminated those menus, so that way you use search functionality. So if I know I want to run Sherlock, for example, I can just type Sherlock. Or if I want to run Watson, I can type that. Or if I want to run a SOX proxy, I just type in the word I want, and then I can go in and then select it. So I can go in, select whatever one I want. I'm just going to run Sherlock, so it's the easy one right now. There is a shortcut available for it, but we're just going to use the module version of it. It's going to drop me into the module window for it. I can then set the settings for it. This one's pretty simple since it only has one option. And once you're done, you execute it just like you would anything else. We have to execute and generate commands that are both aliased. You type in execute, it's going to run that module, and then once the results are done, they're going to come back, and they're going to be displayed in the CLI. Every result is going to be tagged. This is something that I found because I usually have a pretty long delay and a long jitter. So I'll queue up like 5 or 6 tasks. And then when I go back to my agent, all 5 or 6 of those are going to come back all at once. And I'm not really going to, I mean, I'm going to know, but maybe somebody else might not realize which one goes to which task. So each result now comes back and is actually tagged with which task it came from. So task 4's result came back. This is Sherlock's here, and it'll say which one it was. So just a nice little thing that we added in just to make things a little bit easier to track. Like we said before, shell, let me back into my agent. Shell and then whatever command you want to run is an option that you can go in here. But one of the things that I really wanted to add in is something that we're using called an interactive shell. And what that is if I type shell without anything afterwards, it's going to load up a PowerShell, well, a pseudo PowerShell window for you inside of Empire that allows you to interact with it as if I was typing PowerShell commands. And it's going to give you your current working directory. And if I move around between folders and directories, it's going to auto-populate those for you as well. So for example, if I type CD and I want to back up to my previous folder, it's going to take it's going to take a few seconds for it to update because of that delay. But once it does get that update and can confirm that I'm in that new folder, it's going to change my working directory for this interactive shell. This is just a really nice thing because I can go in, I can back out my folders a little bit. It's going to update those. And once those are updated, I can maybe type in ls as well. And then it's going to go in and it's going to tell me, hey, my working directory is this. And then, oh, here's all the folders as well in your current working directory. Just really gives you a nice little window to operate out of, so I don't have to type shell every time I want to do things.
And then just to add on, Coin built this for the PowerShell and the Python agents. So the functionality should pretty much be universal there.
Yeah, then the Python one, which is really nice, you can do both. You can do both Bash and Python commands in there. So really, it's just a universal interactive shell that works on both systems now. And once you're done with using everything into this interactive shell window, you're going to type exit to get back out of it. The reason why we're using exit is because we catch the exit command. Normally when you're operating in a shell window like this, especially with PowerShell and I type exit, it's going to close the window down, which would kill the agent. So we wanted to make sure we caught that so that way you didn't accidentally kill your agent. So exit will drop you out of the interactive shell without actually killing your agent. So there's that. So now I'm out of that window. I'm going to go back to that main menu. We're going to look at all our different options again. The one that we're going to drop into next is plugins. And I'm going to kick it over to Hubble a little bit to kind of talk about what plugins bring to the table.
Yeah, so plugins have actually been around in Empire for a while. One of the developers on the original, or back on the original project, someone submitted the plugin capability as a PR and it got incorporated. But it was never really used all that much, partly because of the way the code base was built. The plugin wasn't able to access a lot of the server functions and stuff like that. So as part of the rebasing of the code we were doing when we built the CLI to move to this team server functionality, is we opened up a lot of the server options to the plugins and made plugins really just like an extension of the server now. So when you drop a plugin in, you can add like options to the main menu and that kind of stuff, as well as just new capability. We have 2 plugins that are public right now, which are 2 different versions of a SOX proxy server. There's a Chisel server and then just a standard SOX proxy server. And then for sponsors, we have a improved reporting function that I'll let Anthony talk a little bit more about, and then a MITRE attack framework plugin that's used for APT emulation. It allows you to select like a specific APT, and it'll go through and disable all the modules in the Empire server that aren't associated with that APT, so that like as when you're getting ready for an assessment or whatever, the team lead could go in and say like, hey, I only want these modules available to my guys to ensure that they're emulating the threat properly that we want to use, and it just allows the control based on the APTs you're selecting as well as the techniques and stuff like that that they're using. And so Anthony, if you want to describe the reporting function a little more.
Yeah, the report one's kind of the other one that we have that's just for sponsors at the moment. That kind of upgrades some of the reports. One of my biggest heartaches with kind of the way the reports work currently in Empire is it's just a text file or a CSV. So what we did was we converted it over to be PDFs. So they use markdown files. So you can configure them. You can add in kind of your own styling guide that you want onto those, and it will generate from those markdowns PDFs. So you set your style guide, and then Empire, that plugin specifically, will leverage the MITRE plugin and generate a report based on all the modules that you ran and give you descriptions based off the MITRE attack framework. So it's a really powerful plugin that kind of allows you to build more in-depth reports if you're trying to use Empire for your assessments. The plugin we're going to show now is going to be the SOX proxy plugin. So this is one of the ones that we have on our GitHub repo that everybody has access to. I'm going to type in use plugin, and then it's going to auto-populate all my available plugins. So it's going to be the SOX proxy plugin. I'm going to drop into that right there, and it's going to give me a very familiar feel to how modules work. It's going to give me all my options here. I can go in, I can set status, for example, to stop if I wanted to stop the server was already running. In this case, we want to keep it running. So we're going to set it to start. And then if I wanted to change my ports, I could. And I'm going to type in execute. And it's going to start up that SOX proxy server for us. And you can see on the left-hand side that it started up that SOX proxy server for us on our Empire box. So if I went in and used module invoke SOX proxy now, I can leverage Empire as kind of my as my C2 framework to be able to run other tools through it. So say if I wanted to use CME for as kind of an example, I can run CME through proxy chains and run that on the other box all through Empire.
Yeah, and then just to add on that I meant to hit on earlier, a big motivation for extending the functionality of plugins is that we want to enable the community to start providing more functionality to Empire while they could take ownership of those code bases. So we are maintaining a community wiki page on the Empire project that if someone has built a plugin that they'd like to share with the community or whatever, if you hit us up on Discord or open an issue on the GitHub to let us know that you've done that, we will add it to the community list so that people can use it. And that way you have total control. You can update your plugin and that functionality as much or as little as you want. And you don't necessarily need us to approve it for you as you maintain that code, and you get to maintain like full control of it. So we felt like it was a good way to open up development for people in a more accessible way instead of having to go through the full Empire review process and PR and waiting for releases and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it just gives a lot of functionality, and really since it allows you to modify that server, you can really build whatever you want into this. We've joked before, if you really wanted to, you could build Snake into Empire if you wanted to, just because you pretty much have full control over modifying the server when you have that plugin enabled. So good or bad depending how you look at it. So maybe we need to make sure only admins can modify the server with plugins, because now that I'm thinking about it, that means any of your operators can mess with your server.
Yeah.
Talking about operators, so I'm gonna go back to our main menu. I'm gonna go and drop into the admin menu, just because this kind of gives you some of the access to all those users that we're talking about. When you have multiple operators, you have them all preloaded into Empire. Starkiller has had this feature for a really long time, where you can see all your different users. You can see if they're an admin currently, and then if they're enabled or disabled. So if I wanted to create a new user, for example, maybe I wanted to have a second account, I can create an account for me with a password or just password, and it's going to generate that user for me, and then it's going to drop them into that list. So you can see here now that I have another account for myself if I had it. We have an enable and disable functionality. This kind of goes back into that team concept that we're trying to push, where I may have multiple operators doing different things, and then say one of our operators went in and they were doing things they weren't supposed to. Maybe they're being really noisy, or maybe their tradecraft isn't where it needs to be. And I don't want to like interrupt the flows that we currently have. I can go in and I can disable that user. So say, we'll use my second account that I have here. I can go in and I can disable that user, so that way they won't be able to go in and do anything at the moment. And then I can go back, I can talk with that user, retrain them up maybe, and then maybe towards the end of the assessment, they're doing what they need to do, and I can re-enable their account. So that way, I have complete control as the admin of who and which operators can do what during my assessments. Let's see. If I go back to the help menu, we have a bunch of other commands in here. One of the new ones that we have in here is notes. Once again, operating from multiple different machines and then being inside of closed networks kind of makes things a little interesting. So you start coming up with some weird ideas that you want to try out. And notes is one of those ones that we kind of wanted just to try out. Notes allows me to upload kind of like little things, like little notes, for example, to the server, and then I can access them from any other workstation. So if I wanted to go in and say, look, I found a password, I can upload that note to the server, and then maybe, I also know what the password is, and maybe the password is password. Those get uploaded to the server, and I can type in notes, and then it's going to kick back the notes for me that I have. And see, I already have a bunch of notes already in here. This just kind of gives you a way to keep things consistent and all in the same place, and then pull them out later. So that way you're not trying to manage multiple things, especially if you're jumping from workstation to workstation. And then maybe I don't like the notes that I have in there. I can clear out all my notes that are in there, and then it's going to come back empty. So just a nice little feature that we added in that we're just trying out. Eventually, we want to be able to add in some timestamps and then be able to access notes from any menu. But first, we want to make sure this is kind of a feature that people actually need. If it's not, then maybe we'll just end up removing it if it's not something that's useful. Next, we're going to kick over to Hubble. He's going to talk about some of the obfuscation techniques that we have in here. It's all over to you, man.
Yeah, so we added in keyword obfuscation a little while ago, like back in May at the beginning of the year. And I don't know if people really understood the use case of it. So it's for, even if you've disabled AMSI, and when you're talking about like a base Defender installation, Defender still does search in memory for known strings to be bad for things like Mimikatz or Empire or stuff like that. So keyword obfuscation allows you to identify words in your scripts that you want Empire to find and replace as it's sending across to the agent. And this allows you to maintain all your scripts on the Empire server as they are without modifying them. So you can do kind of on-the-fly modification of your scripts. And then if you figured out something was broken in your script, you can go look at it without it being all obfuscated. So like seatbelt, for example, if they started, if seatbelt started being a known bad word in memory and it was looking, and Defender was looking for it, you could type keyword obfuscation and then invoke seatbelt. If you don't add a second word, Empire will automatically just generate a random string to replace seatbelt with. If you provide a second word, then you can designate what it is being replaced with. That was added in because words like get or public or things like that, and some of the stuff you do for reflection, get field specifically, for like reflection will automatically trigger alerts in the operational logs of ETW for Windows, but they have to be obfuscated in a specific way, like using like the if you use like the backtick, that works for obfuscating it and breaking up that signature. But if you just like replace it with a random word, it would break it. So it allows you to be like very precise in your replacement to build signatures that again don't affect your underlying scripts, so that they maintain like their nice readability for updating.
Yeah, and then also we have the obfuscate and obfuscate command in here as well, which does some global obfuscation for all your PowerShell commands. At the moment, the current implementation has some conflicts with keyword obfuscation, so we just recommend don't running both of them at the same time. All right, and then that's really it on the admin menu. We're going to expand this some more with some other functionality as we build it in. So, but the one that I'm sure everybody's most interested in is the chat window. So from anywhere inside of Empire, so this can be inside of an agent or another menu, you can drop into this chat menu. And what that's going to do is going to pull you into here, and it's going to load you up into that chat room session. And I can talk to all the other users that are in here. So I just sent a message out to those guys. They should be able to drop in as well. It's going to tell you as people come into the chat room and they talk, you can interact with them. Yeah. This is something that we thought was really interesting. Once again, going back to closed networks, we do quite a few assessments on some closed networks that don't have access to the internet. So we typically have to bring our own chat server. So we're standing up like our own IRC server just so we can communicate with other people. It kind of becomes cumbersome. It just adds to our infrastructure. So we were throwing out an idea, and then just one weekend, I took some time and I just kind of coded up a proof of concept plugin that does this exact thing. And then we're like, you know what, this is a really cool feature. Like this shouldn't be a plugin. Like this is something everybody should have access to. So we built it into the current Sox.io server. So now everybody has access to this chat feature. And this chat feature is not just something that's going to be in Empire, but it's also going to be in Starkiller as well. I'll kick it over to you, Vince, so you can kind of show off that one as well before I go over some more of the chat functionality.
Yeah, so again, going back to what we talked about, moving to the server client architecture, having the CLI and Starkiller interact with the server through the same interfaces allows us to build these cross-functionality features a lot easier. So this is the chat feature that we built into Starkiller. At the moment, this is in our sponsors version of Starkiller, but we have a sponsorship goal set up, and once we reach that sponsorship goal, it'll be moved into the public version of Starkiller. But it works pretty much the same as the as a chat window works. And of course, now that I'm demoing, it's not typing. Okay, so now I'm seeing the chat from earlier, and I can see who's saying what, and I can send messages back. And in addition to that, we can also see when people are actually in the chat menu or out of the chat menu. So you can see as Hubble and Coin leave and join the channel via the CLI, we can see red or green dots to let us know that they're actually seeing the menu. And then in Starkiller, this menu will kind of follow you around as you're switching between different things. And if somebody wants to send me a message, so we can see here that it'll let us know when there's unread messages that we can view. So again, this is currently available in the sponsors version of Starkiller, but will be moved to the public version once we reach our sponsorship goal. And I'll go ahead and post a link to that in the chat, and then Coin, you can go ahead and take over.
All right. Yep. And so at the moment, yeah, the chat functionality of the Empire CLI though is available to everybody. So it's just going to be the Starkiller one that we have just privately at the moment for sponsors.
And then also, just in case anybody here hasn't used Starkiller, Starkiller is a free. We have a repo. I'll post a link to it. It's a free graphical user interface for Empire. There's a sponsors version of it that has a few extra features like a file browser and now the chat feature.
Yep, and as we reach those sponsorship goals, we kick over the features into the public version. Like I know we just recently got enough people for multiple windows. So one of the new functionalities that we have in there is now you can do pop-out windows in Starkiller. So say you want to operate with multiple agents at the same time. you can do all that stuff. So you can do like 60 different agents if you wanted to at the same time. Please don't do that because the database probably can't handle it. We're working to fix that though. So going back to where we were, I'm going to drop into an agent again, just because I want to show you guys, like if I'm operating in an agent and say I'm queuing things up, you know, I'm gonna pull up Mimikatz, I'm gonna run that, and then I want to go back into my chat window. It's gonna bring up the chat history, at least the last 20 messages from that chat history, so that way I can see where I was at. I can communicate like, you know, hey, I ran Mimikatz. That way everybody knows I ran Mimikatz real quick, and then once I'm done here, I type back. That's gonna bring me back into this menu. And then whenever my results come in, they're going to come back into this as well. So kind of giving you that option so that way you can jump and do multiple tasks at the same time. Kind of give you as much flexibility as possible. And the last feature that I kind of want to go over is going to be the malleable listener. This is something that we rolled out a couple months ago. I just wanted to re-hit it because it really kind of brings in that threat emulation piece that they're really pushing towards in Empire. So if you're not familiar with what the malleable listener brings, it's a functionality that's found in Cobalt Strike that you allow to bring profiles. And these profiles have like pre-configured settings already in them. So that way your C2 channel, as well as your listener and your stager, all look like whatever you're trying to code. So for example, I think Vince is probably going to drop in the link to it. But if you take a look, like I can set up my C2 channel to look like Amazon or Gmail, or I can try to emulate a threat. Maybe I'm going in and I'm trying to emulate APT1 or APT10. All those profiles are out there already because a lot of people have been using Cobalt Strike for a long time and built these profiles. All we've done is kind of built a way to ingest those profiles and then load our listener in such a way that we can do threat emulation based off of those. So if I'm going in and I'm trying to do like set profile, for example, and I'm going to set my profile as, oh, little delay there. Maybe I try to do my profile as APT1. I have a profile already in there in that folder that's APT1. So now I'm going to do set profile as APT1. I'm going to scroll up real quick and you can see my profile is already loaded in here. And I'm going to set my port to 443. All that stuff's now configured and I'm going to execute this. Once that's loaded, I'm going to go back into my listeners window and I'm going to kind of show you some of the info that gets loaded into these. So what it does is it pulls in from these malleable things. I'm going to go to the GitHub real quick. So here's the APT1 profile. Oh, go ahead, Hubble.
Yeah, I was just going to say while he's pulling that up, what's really nice about these is in the previous listeners for Empire, anytime you want to change like where the data was being hidden in your comms or any of those kinds of values, you had to go code an entire new listener class and put that in there, and it was very static. With these malleable profiles, now as long as whatever profile you give it, it automatically updates all of that network obfuscation, where the data is hidden, how you're checking in like your cookies for like your key for validating and all that stuff. Like it's all very flexible now instead of having to code an entirely new listener class every time you wanted to change something slightly.
Yeah, and this all ties back to that threat emulation piece. Like in our courses that we teach, threat emulation is really the message that we try to get across is how do I make my stuff look like the bad guys as much as possible? So if I want to kind of test the blue team that's on that network, and I want to come in with a threat like APT1, for example, I want to be able to emulate their tactics as much as possible and look like them, so that way when the defenders go throughout their network, they're looking for those type of threats. I don't want to roll in with something they'd never seen before, because that makes things really, really difficult for them. I'm sure Hubble's going to chime in when we talk about 0 days. You don't want to roll in with 0 days and drop those on a network when you're doing a red team assessment, because that's not going to help the defenders at all.
Yeah, they're called 0 days for a reason, because no one has any defense against them. So rolling in and dropping a bunch of 0 days on your customer doesn't do much for them. So we're really less about the can we go undetected and more can we provide a representation of the threats that the customer is most likely to implement, and then evaluate them on the response to that.
and I think the malleable profiles really bring that piece to them. Allows you to pick out those threats once again. Recently, I think it was a couple weeks ago, I pushed out an update. Any profile from Cobalt Strike now should be able to load it into Empire now. There should be no limitation on which one. And the link that Vince sent out, at least are the ones that I've tested thus far. As I go through and test more, I'll load more profiles into that repo. Or if you know you have a profile that's not in there and you know it works, feel free to put a pull request in so we can load it in. I think it's just really helpful to have one repo that has hundreds of different profiles available, just because it's really hard to kind of scour across the internet and find all these random ones that are sitting out there. But yeah, this one's loaded up and ready to go, so we can go in and generate stagers against it and emulate APT1 if we wanted to. I'm going to go over to the Discord channel now. That was really all the functionality that we wanted to go through, but we still have some time available.
I had one thing I was going to show.
Oh, you wanted to invoke assembly.
Yeah.
Before I go to questions, I'm going to kick it over to Jake. He's going to talk about one other piece of functionality that we loaded in recently.
Yeah, let me grab presenter. So even though we still think that that PowerShell still has a ton of life in terms of red team emulation and that kind of stuff, we are adding additional functionality to Empire to start supporting things like C# and that kind of stuff. As a teaser, there may be eventually C# agents coming to Empire. That's still a work in progress, but that may be on the horizon. We'll see. But so as of now, we at least have the ability to load and use C# assemblies. So right now, the module that supports that is invoke assembly, which was built by Kevin in our Discord channel. If you're in there, he wrote this module for us. There's also a reflective load shortcut in the current base Empire CLI that I added that does a very similar functionality, but that has not been ported over to the new CLI yet, so you have to use the invoke assembly at the moment. So we put it in here. I have seatbelt loaded onto my desktop here. And then we can just go ahead and execute it onto the thing.
You spelled execute wrong.
Okay. Oh, I did. That's why you don't type things in load. If you've ever taken any training from us, you'll know that I harp on the concept that when you're doing your actual execution, during an assessment, you shouldn't really be typing anything by hand. You should be cutting and pasting all of your commands in, because it avoids errors like that and you creating more traffic than you really should. Typing by hand is for when you're testing your stuff on your test range. So yeah, so that ran seatbelt directly, ran the file from my desktop. It loads it into a base64 encoded string, sends it over to the target, loads the assembly, and executes it without the assembly ever hitting disk. So we do have the capability to support C# assemblies via that method, and it supports both EXEs as well as DLLs.
Yeah, crazy powerful feature that Hubble kind of snuck in with Kevin. So if you haven't played around with it, it's really cool. I don't know if you covered, but the public versus private, I think there's a little bit of a limitation there, right?
Yeah, there is. So a lot of C# assemblies are built with the main function being private. You do have to go compile them as public to use invoke assembly. If you reflective load, there are some PowerShell commands you can use to expose those private functions. Kevin and I were talking about it. We're trying to add that feature or expose those private functions automatically. in the invoke assembly, like we'll probably add that to make it a little easier, so you don't have to go recompile your C# projects just to use them this way.
Yeah, that'd be really nice. Vince, Hubble, do you have anything else before I go and look for any questions? If anybody has any questions or things they want us to go back and check out again?
No, nothing to add. You can post questions in Discord or into GoToWebinar, and we can address them either way.
Yeah, I've been answering the questions as they popped up on GoToWebinar while you guys were talking.
Oh, thanks. So yeah, we got about 5 minutes left. I mean, we could always go a little over depending on if anybody has any questions. So please feel free to ask any questions. We'll hang out in here just for a little bit longer to answer anything.
Yeah, feel free to ask about anything. It doesn't have to be related to the CLI.
Yeah, no problem. Glad you enjoyed it. So hopefully we can do a couple more of these little ones where they're just like short little hour ones where we can cover some random features or little things. I know Hubble loves to talk about obfuscation, so if people ask and are really nice to him, maybe he'll do an hour talk on obfuscation again.
Wait, did you say an hour-long talk on obfuscation?
Oh, sorry. I mean, Hubble could talk days about obfuscation, so he'll keep it really short to just an hour. That's what I meant to say. I see a couple people talking in the channel, so I just want to make sure we give everybody a chance to ask their questions. Documentation question.
So the documentation in the Empire CLI repo, there's some documentation that we threw together on how to use it. It's not super detailed, but it should kind of show you how to use shortcuts and anything new that's in the CLI. And then when that gets moved over to the main Empire repo, we'll be updating the wiki documentation to kind of be tailored to the new CLI. And then as far as the plugins or the malleable stuff, I don't know, is there documentation on that stuff? Maybe a blog post?
There's a blog post about the malleable profiles. Let me see if I can grab that real quick. It's on our webpage where we kind of talk about kind of the functionality and how they work. Let me grab that one for you real quick in case you're interested on malleable profiles.
While you're doing that, we got a question about the credentials, so I was just going to show it. When you are connected up, this is the wrong one. When you are connected to, when everyone's connected to the same Empire server, I did not run credentials earlier. That was Anthony. So anything that gets populated into your credentials database is shared between all the operators.
And again, this is something that's in the CLI and in Starkiller. When you go to the credentials page in Starkiller, you can also manually add credentials, and all the other operators will be able to see those.
They should be able to. I might have to go check and make sure that I haven't tested that in a while. The functionality was in Empire. I would have to go check that we didn't break it for PS exec. You used to be able to define things in the credential table by the number in the credential table. I'll have to go double check.
And then one thing that's not in Empire, well, the API endpoint exists, but it's not in the Empire CLI at the moment, but it is in Starkiller, is if you have credentials that you found that weren't pulled from like Mimikatz, for example, you can manually add those into the database as well. So Vince has that in Starkiller at the moment, where you can manually add them in and go across and be like, hey, I found this password. And then we added notes in as well. So if you know which machines that it's good on, you could add notes on there. Once again, this is something we're in the process of adding. It just hasn't been fully implemented yet.
Yeah, they were looking to for like use with modules and stuff to pull it out of the table.
Yeah,
in the
no,
module?
I was just kind
Yeah.
of talking about the
Okay.
credentials table in general.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
If
Yeah.
it's showing off or somebody's showing off right now.
Yeah, I'm showing, this is how you would add a credential. You can, so like I didn't run Mimikatz, but it shows up in this credentials and I can copy that to clipboard. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, the Starkiller GUI is gotten. I would recommend using it over the CLI at this point. But I do know lots of people love their CLIs. I still use the CLI a lot, but Starkiller really is a much more functional interface at this point.
Yeah, if we killed off the CLI, somebody would be really disappointed. So.
Yeah.
But the new CLI is does give it a run for its money. The old one, I mean, it functions really like I haven't found a lot of like bugs in it. It functions well, but it's not very intuitive. Having the tab complete, it makes a huge difference on the new one.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any other questions? We're happy to go through anything else. Even just regular red teaming or pen testing questions that somebody might have. If you have those, we're happy to ask them.
Someone asked about the implants being SOX proxy aware. They're not. If you have to use the SOX proxy server implant.
Yes.
Yeah, so they're not SOX proxy aware. They are like proxy aware from the sense of like the standard like internet access proxy, but they're not SOX proxy aware.
All right. Let's give it like another minute, and then we'll close this out. But we'll still be in the Discord channel if anybody else wants to chat or has more questions. What are other options to generate agents? Hubble, I'll let you kind of talk about all our different options.
Where did you see the question?
It's in GoToWebinar.
I'm not sure the question for other options to generate agents. Oh, you mean just the various
Stagers.
ways? There's the various stagers. There's a whole bunch of them. You can build a C# implant, well, launcher sort of. It just launches. It's just a C# exe that launches PowerShell. It's not really a true C# stager. We have one actually that I can say I do have a C# stager that I'm probably going to be adding in the next a proper C# stager that I'm probably going to be adding in the next iteration of, or the next release of Empire. We'll see. I gotta test it some more. But you can do HTAs. You could do it supports a Bash Bunny. It supports building DLLs. There is probably more than a dozen ways of building agents. Or stagers, yeah, sorry. There's probably more than a dozen ways of building stagers in there. If you want to go, actually, Vincent, if you want to go to the stagers tab on Starkiller. Yeah, so these are all there. So there's macros, there's Pi installers, there's OSX packages. If you're attacking a Mac, you can do HDAs, bats. Actually, there's a pretty cool update we made to the batch file that removed the length limitation that was preventing batch files from being obfuscated, because batch has a really short command limitation. And I found through Reddit, actually, I found on the PowerShell subreddit, someone had published a way of removing that limitation. So you can now obfuscate your PowerShell commands as long as you want while using the batch file. And then, yeah, there's just a whole bunch of different ways for the launcher or for stagers to be built.
Yeah, and it's very easy to add more of these. So if you, just like modules, if you have any other ones that you want to load in, you pretty much just have to write a file for it, and then we load it right in. So a lot of different options. I was playing around with the Bash Bunny one recently, just because I loaded up NetHunter on a cell phone and I was just playing around with it to make sure that all that stuff still works. So at least the Bash Bunny part of it at least definitely still works. So if you have one laying around, go ahead and play around with it. It's a good time. But I haven't seen any more questions, so I think we're good now. Do you guys have anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, but we'll be around in Discord. We usually are. So if anything, if you think of anything, you have any questions, then you can bring it up in Discord in the Empire or the Star Killer channels or the webinar channel, and we'll try to get back to you.
Yep. Usually one of us is hanging around there, so there's pretty much always somebody available. If we're not available, then usually Kevin, he tends to be able to answer a lot of questions as well. So thanks again, guys. Thanks for everybody showing up. We're always really excited to kind of share all these new features with everybody because we like to put this stuff out there. And then, somebody just wants us to share the Discord link before we close out. So Vince, if you could just publish that one more time for everybody, just so they have that link.
Yeah.
And then after you do that, we can close this out.
I just posted it.
All right. So everybody should now have that Discord link to jump in there. We try to stay pretty active on there. So
it's also in the Empire README.
Good point. Yeah, there's a link of the Empire README as well. Yes, there's a link at the bottom and at the top. So you should be able to easily select either of those to be able to drop into that. Thanks again, everybody, for showing up. We're going to close this out. If you have any questions, the Discord channel is going to be open pretty much forever. So feel free to ask any more questions in there. We can get back to you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Did you